Okay, I now have the pleasure of introducing Dawn. We're going to hear her testimony, and I'll give you a little bio on here. Dawn Malandra is 31 years old, and she's a married mother to 4 beautiful children. Olivia, 12, Ella, 10, Mackenzie, 7, and Joshua, 6. She is a lab assistant at Central Washington Hospital, as well as a student at Grand Canyon University. She's acquiring her bachelor's degree in Christian Studies. After that, her goal is to get a Master's of Divinity degree. She plans on looking into church planning or becoming a pastor in an already developed church. She loves Jesus and is slightly obsessed with elephants. She loves creative art and enjoys singing, making jewelry, and doing crafts with her children. She also enjoys the outdoors and is blown away by the beauty of this valley. She loves this church and is constantly looking for ways to become involved. Dawn, please share.
So as she mentioned, my name is Dawn, and I am beyond honored to be here with you guys this weekend. I'm so excited. I wasn't a part of this last year, but I'm super excited to be a part this year. My earliest memory of church is one that I did not make probably the greatest impression in God's house. I was probably younger than 5, and the service had already been over. My mom's off talking with some of the other churchgoers, and me and another child managed to wander over to the offering, or not the offering, but the communion trays. And we started to race to see who could drink the many cups of juice that were left. And then we decided we would taste some of the wafer, and that was not nearly as good, so we went back to the juice. So to say that I didn't make a great first impression is an understatement, but still, didn't get hit by lightning, and God still loved me anyway. So I was a child that went to church, but I usually went with a friend, or, my parents went to church sometimes, and we weren't frequent goers. But I don't remember God ever being a central part of it. I don't remember any of the sermons. I remember the snacks and singing a couple songs, but nothing that really drove home that I had a loving Heavenly Father. We prayed at night, but it was more of just a routine as opposed to something I really felt like I was talking to God about. And I went to church camps during the summer, but again, it always more about social gathering than God. When I was in high school, I started to date a guy that we had that conversation about, what do you believe? Who are you? What are your morals and values? And he said, well, what religion are you? And I said, well, I'm a Christian. And he said, well, what church do you go to? And I said, well, we don't go to church. And he said, well, you're not a Christian. And I became so horribly offended. I couldn't even believe it. And mind you, at this point, I'd never really had some huge connection with God or some overwhelming moment with him. The closest encounter that I had with God was I was a child, and at night we were praying, and we said, then now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I shall die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And at that point, I had never really listened to the words, but that night I became horribly afraid, because at that point I'm like, I'm going to die. And I'm this small child. My parents are asleep. And I looked over on my wall, and I had a reminder card on the wall about saying your prayers at night, and had a picture of Jesus, but at night when you turn the lights off, there was a glow-in-the-dark cross. And I remember praying, and I think I told my mom about it the next day, but I felt so lightened by it. I just sat there and talked about anything, things that were going on at school, all the funny things that were happening with my friends, things that were going on with my cat, just like random things that a small child would talk about. And I felt this lightness about me, and I've never experienced it since. But that was the closest encounter, and it had been far from that point. So for me, it was kind of like having a knockoff designer bag. I had a knockoff Christian label for myself. I said I was a Christian, but and I believed in God, but I didn't have some profound relationship with him. So of course, the only thing I did was I went and I asked my mom. I said, well, did you went to church when you were younger, right? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, what kind of church did you go to? And she said, Assemblies of God. So I go to the phone book. I find the first Assemblies of God church that I can find. And I said, we're going. So we go to this church, and my mom and I have always been the best of friends. But in like the 31 years I've been alive, we've probably had 4 pretty good fights. And that was the weekend that we had one. And we both walked into this church, and we're sitting there, and we're trying to have the, leave it to Beaver face on, where everybody's happy and go lucky. And the pastor starts talking, and he said something to the effect of, God has laid upon my heart, there are people in here that are at odds and that truly love each other, and you guys just need to work it out because you'll be stronger together. At that exact moment, my mom and I both look at each other like, whoa, this is weird. And we went to the church for a while, and I ended up inviting this guy to come to the youth group with me. The minute he walked in, he kind of snubbed his nose at it. It was a small church in a converted apartment building, and it was a nice church, but it was nothing like, I had eventually went to his church, and he went to like some huge mega church. They did church all day, had all kinds of things going on. And so that kind of got me thinking about the kind of person and people that I want in my life. And eventually we started to kind of stray at that point, because I thought, this is somebody who's supposed to be loving God the way that I'm hearing about, and you're totally judging everybody and judging this church. And so we went along our separate ways. One of the unfortunate parts about this church is that the teachings were very hellfire and brimstone, like in your face, not talking about the loving God that we have, but this very just God. And I can't remember a sermon that didn't include something about the end times, which is something that totally freaked me out up to that point. And so luckily this wonderful youth pastor came in. We had a high turnover rate in youth pastors from like the couple years that we had been there. And he would talk about this loving God. And I wanted to know more about this loving God, because he had this relationship with God that was something I admired and that was incredible. But it was very confusing to hear that on a Wednesday night, but then go on a Sunday and hear about, God disliked this, this, and this. And there was a very politically charged church that would tell you about all the different things that were going on. And so I was very confused about it. And I started to step away from the church because, again, with this high turnover rate, this youth pastor ended up leaving, and someone stepped in its place that was more along the same lines of the lead pastor about, this very just God that we had, and it wasn't about a loving God. And I couldn't ever get what this youth pastor had. I could never get what I was seeing other people. These other people were sitting in these sermons, and they were hearing the same things I was, but they were experiencing a very different relationship with God than I was. So I strayed from the church. I ended up making some choices that were not exactly on the top 10 list of anybody. And I found myself back at the church. I was an unwed, pregnant 19-year-old, and I was being horribly judged by these people when I walked in. It was supposed to be a women's event, and they all kept asking me, when are you getting married? Oh my goodness, how did this happen? Just really making me feel terrible. And while I knew that God wasn't super excited about the way that it happened, I could not imagine that my baby was anything other than an amazing miracle. So I left the church and decided to kind of go on my way. And I separated myself from God, and I remember him trying to make himself apparent in my life again, in that I would feel some conviction once in a while about how I should pray over a meal, or wow, I should probably ask for forgiveness. That probably wasn't the right thing to do. Or maybe I should change how I act this way. Maybe I should go to church. But I was very stubborn and very bullheaded and quite overwhelmed myself. I was a child raising a child. So I ended up marrying my now husband. We had another child, and we ended up moving over here because his plant that he had worked at and our financial stability fell through, and my parents lived over here. So we came over here, and I started to be involved in a MOPS group. And Andrew actually came and spoke at our MOPS group. And he told the story about a boy who had these encounters with God, and God would leave him these little notes that said, "Smiley," and it said, "See how much I love you." And it's a really incredible story. It's much too long to be able to tell here, but when I walked out, there was a yellow sticky note that was stuck to my window of my car that said, "Smiley." And no one could have imagined how much I needed that day, and there's no way that Andrew could have known that that was my car. But I kept that note in my car until it probably disintegrated, and it was incredible. And so I found out what church he went to, or what church he was the pastor of, and it was over at Eastmont. And I walked in there with my 2 small children and my mom, and they started doing the worship service, and my kids immediately run to the stage and get on the stage in the middle of worship. I've never been at this church before. They're dancing around, having a great time. I'm on this side, like sweating bullets, trying to get them off the stage. I'm so freaked out because I had gone to churches where kids didn't act that way. You sat in the services, you didn't talk. And my mom, who also attended churches that way, her whole life was like, "Dawn, come on, get the kids." And I'm like, "I can't." And in the middle, Andrew just stopped and said, "Really, it's okay." And that just stuck with me. I thought, wow, if this is a church that's so willing to just let these wild kids run up and just start dancing around, I want to be a part of that. Unfortunately, life had other plans. I got sick with significant kidney issues, and the lack of God and direction in my life really started to show, and it kind of all started to fall apart. I was having marital issues. We had 2 more children. We became horribly in debt. I mean, things were just falling apart all around. And I found myself so unhappy, I had no idea what to do. I found out that Columbia Grove, I had passed by the highway a few times and found out that Columbia Grove had moved from Eastmont to here. And I walked in, and I'm not going to lie, I had a really horrible thought. I said, "There's a coffee stand, this is our church." Hadn't been involved in any service yet. And I thought, no, that's terrible, don't say that. But I walked in, and it was like I had never left. And I didn't feel any judgment. Everyone was so sweet. Try as I might to stay in the very back of the room, at the very back table, with nobody sitting by me. Nobody ever let that happen. Somebody always invited us to sit with them or talk to them or get my kids involved, which was awesome because when we first got here, the first service, my kids wouldn't even leave. Second or third time we were here, they're like, "Bye, Mom, it's time for church." And I loved that because my kids were finding something that I had always wanted them to have, which was this loving relationship with God, something I had never got to experience. And they would come out of Sunday school and they would have all these wonderful things to say. They would talk to me throughout the week, and it was just awesome. And so I kept going through the motions, and I kept coming, and eventually things started to shift. And Andrew gave a sermon. It was during the season of Advent, not this one, but the one previous. And as I said, end times and rapture always freaks me out to the point where I would literally just leave. I couldn't have that conversation. I cried through the entire service. My mom even said, "Hey, we can't do this. If we need to leave, we need to leave. If you're just really," because I was melting down in the back. I'm surprised I didn't have a whole commotion going on. But the way he explained it and the beauty of the way that he presented it was so incredible and life-changing. I've never felt such a peace at something that used to terrify me so greatly. And he has such a gift for doing that. And I have never had the gospel presented to me in such a loving manner, but still while remaining, I understand the justice of God and what we need to do. But I finally have that relationship with God that I have always desired to have. I know that he loves me. I know that he loves my children. And even though he doesn't like the mistakes I've made, he still has worked his way through all of these many things. And it didn't matter how many dark alleys I found myself down, he was always there with a flashlight. And I can see that now looking back. And I just want to say, we don't have to walk around with knockoff Christian relationships with God. We can walk around with the genuine thing. And this past summer, I walked by a mirror, and I've never, I've always settled for what I thought I should achieve in this life because, the choices I made, I became a mom really young. I've married, I've had these things going on. And I walked by a mirror, and I had just gotten the book Greater by Stephen Furtick and had just finished reading it. And it occurred to me that I am capable of anything I want to do. My past does not have to dictate what I choose to do in my future. I did some research, and that same week I enrolled at Grand Canyon University, where I am trying to attain my bachelor's in Christian studies. I was just offered a position in the National Collegiate Scholarship Program where I've got a 4.0. I work a full-time job. I have 4 children, and it's incredible. I never could have guessed these things were possible, and it's all because of God. I never could have done it on my own, and it's because of this church and the amazing people in it that have welcomed my family and I with open arms. My father has started attending this church, which I thought was never possible. My whole childhood, I heard that he would never step foot in a church, and this church has made him feel welcome. So I have a gift for each of you today. My daughters and I have taken these compact mirrors, and we put some little flowers on them and a saying, because on those moments where you are wondering if you can do it, I want you to pull that out, and I want you to look at yourself, and I want you to remember that this is who Jesus died for. He saw through time, knew you were worth it, knew you could do incredible things, and picked you out to live in this time, in this moment, to do what you're doing for his purposes. So I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. I have so enjoyed this weekend, and I could not ask for a better group of ladies to be a part of. So thank you very much.